Number 25, the Root Pack. Let's not mess around here with these guys. It's the first boss, so it's meant to be easy, and the only reason it gets an extra point in S ranking is because you have to do a slightly different technique to make sure you get the parries without getting hit. Number 24, Goopy Legrand. Once again, pretty much the first boss, but this time you actually have to visualize the boss's attacks, rather than just moving on instinct, or to a rhythm of fire. Otherwise, the S rank is handed to you on a platter, and pretty much everything he does can be avoided with a simple dash or duck. Number 23, Baroness von Bonbon. Honestly, for an IL-2 boss, this is kind of underwhelming. At this point, you've beaten Ribby and Croak, and perhaps dabbled in Jimmy the Great, and thus, for a first-time player, you should have enough experience to wipe the floor with this boss. In Expert mode, her dual heads are a genuine threat, but they're manageable if you get it in your head that you don't have to be on the platform at all times. Once you've figured out Expert, S ranking is pretty simple. Number 22, Hildeberg. I think this is a fair placement for the first plane boss. Initially, it is difficult to adjust to the new controls, and especially to the dash turning you small, which is something new players do just straight up forget to do, but with some practice and an understanding of the first few phases, the only real stress of this boss is the Robin Hood Cloud guy, who actually does pose a reasonable threat. Expert mode doesn't change enough to really put you off, and once again, an S rank is pretty easy once you've had some practice. I will say though that the stars can be a small point of RNG in this fight that can be a tiny bit frustrating when you're focused more on avoiding the UFOs. Number 21, Sally Stageplay. Fair play to Sally Stageplay. She isn't the easiest boss in the game, but to be honest, it's just because they've accidentally injected a bit of difficulty into getting an S rank. Smoke Bomb makes everything so easy to avoid, and only the second phase can actually be called difficult because of the mice bots making the stage claustrophobic. So yeah, while that is difficult, it will only get 1 out of 3 of your hit points, meaning the rest of the boss is basically a gimme. But when S ranking, you need to get 3 parries, all practically in the very first phase with some good RNG. You can get parries from the roses, but that's quite heavily luck based, and accidental positioning is the only way you're doing that. You also can't just let the first phase run until you get the parries, as you are on a time limit. So while it's possible, there is a little bit of luck involved, on top of not getting hit, and thus it's actually reasonably difficult. Number 20, Cagney Carnation. The big ol' final boss of Isle 1 isn't as big and scary as you may think. This guy plays dirty, happily spamming attacks on expert mode that do genuinely take you off guard. You've got to clean up the minions at the same time as dealing damage to the boss, or you just get overwhelmed. This means less damage per second on Cagney, and thus it's harder to meet the time crunch when doing the S rank. Honestly, it's not majorly difficult, but does take some adjusting to. Number 19, Werner Werman. The easiest IL-3 boss. It's like a brief break between all the bosses that make IL-3 hell. Smoke Bomb makes most of this guy's attacks pretty much useless, and it feels like overall, RNG doesn't make it majorly difficult. The second phase is exceptionally claustrophobic, but if you stay calm and know what you're doing, it shouldn't cause you much trouble. It's in the S rank that losing health from some random spin or a bit of debris can make it reasonably difficult, and needing to get the parries early on can be a pain, especially with the bullet arcs making it difficult to avoid getting hit while getting the parries. Number 18. Phantom Express. Very cool boss and design, but let's be real, he isn't that menacing. The first phase doesn't exist, just get a parry every once in a while and you're good. The second phase can be countered by just standing to the left or right of the carriage, and the third phase is so easy if you just make sure you kill the ghosts, and the final phase, well, yeah, it's manageable, but I completely get why you'd mess up and get hit on an S rank here. The randomness of the coal flames and the targeting of the bone rings do make the final phase a bit of a mess, especially since you're on a moving platform. So yes, difficult, but not that bad. Number 17, Beppy the Clown. Very similarly to the Phantom Express, Beppy's whole threat is in his final phase. The phases before are tricky at first glance, but some patience and practice make his attacks easy to avoid and just basically are nullified. The final phase though has these penguins, whose positions shift randomly and pretty much take command of the whole stage. The biggest worry though is their onslaught of baseballs, which make the stage even more cramped, as they lock on and you can't kill the penguins as they roll in, so it takes some precise maneuvering to clear out some penguins while avoiding the balls. This does of course make S ranking difficult, but the extra requirements for S rank are handed to you on a platter, so in comparison it isn't that bad. Number 16, the Howling Aces. As our first DLC boss, I think we can all agree that the others are just easier. Don't get me wrong, there are some gimmicky bits in here, and if you aren't paying attention, you will get caught out. But if you just lock in on what you're doing and employ the correct techniques, you have a good shot here. The initial learning period is slightly overwhelming, especially with the feeling that this boss as a whole doesn't fit in Cuphead, both boss design and art style wise. However, the plane platform you stand on is the only thing making this boss even slightly difficult. Pre-planning your position and ducking when you need to are paramount to not getting hit by a rogue tennis ball or fire hydrant. The lasers are an intriguing addition, but just give you parries, which is lovely for the S rank, with the final phase's camera rotations actually causing some kerfuffle, but I just turn my head in the direction it wants and focus on when and where to jump. Not difficult, but certainly not easy. While you're here, you should subscribe. I've got more videos coming every week. Number 15, S for Winchester. I have to start this explanation with the context that the first time I beat S for Winchester, I accidentally got the S rank. It took me some time to rejig my brain to beating her, but it seems that once I did, the S rank was also pretty much a given with all the parry opportunities and a lack of health on most phases. Overall, this boss takes a bit of work to get used to, as all the phases are unique and have physics and attacks that you don't really see in the game. The final phase is harrowing on your initial attempt, but the intercept points are easy to get used to, and the chilies are too slow to be much of a threat. On a first run, everything is kind of overwhelming, but once you've got some practice, this boss isn't that bad. Number 14, Jimmy the Great. I will admit, initially I remember really having trouble with the puppet phase on this boss fight. The tracking of the turban really threw me off, and made it difficult to dodge the puppet's bullets. Eventually you learn that you can just position it where you like, and make it much less of a problem. But this early into the game, you don't have the experience to easily figure that out, while panicking over the puppet. The other phases have their tricks, but overall are manageable once you know what you're doing. Though, when S-ranking, the RNG of the first phase can be annoying if there's a specific attack you like to get easy parries on, or just are better at dodging. Number 13, Wally Warbles. A really bizarre boss, as I truly remember him not being insanely difficult. He's definitely worthy of being an Isle 2, but is a walk in the park in comparison to who you fight next, and thus he's overshadowed quite severely. He still does put up a good fight though, and his attack patterns do create unique problems, with very new strategies needing to be employed. These awkward attacks are difficult to avoid, especially on Expert, where sitting on the back of the screen in the first phase is no longer an option. But once you get over the hurdles of learning the Expert changes, it honestly isn't that hard to get an S rank. Number 12, Rumor Honeybottoms. The first boss of Isle 3 isn't all it's bigged up to be. Yes, it is genuinely quite awkward to get hits in on the first and last phases, as you have to position yourself on an ever-shifting elevator of platforms. But if you just use the chase or a crack shot, it kind of mitigates the difficulty, unless you're trying to S rank. This whole fight takes the cake for random hits that were pretty much unavoidable, as the platforms move you around uncontrollably, and you can still be hit by random off-screen projectiles. The limited platforms on Expert make this even worse, as you find that the only safe space on the entire screen can't even be stood in, and thus you have to choose between getting hit by a projectile or just jumping and falling straight to the bottom. That's not even mentioning the tiny gaps between platforms that can sometimes send you straight to the bottom. The attacks themselves aren't that difficult to avoid, but all these factors come together to make this reasonably difficult. The fist missiles on the last phase also have such a weird pattern that it's sometimes difficult to figure out where they're going next. Number 11, Moonshine Mob. Another boss full to the brim with micromanaging, especially on the first phase. Kill the goons, bait out the bombs, and take out the caterpillar, at the same time as damaging the boss. Pretty overwhelming for initial run-throughs, yet very manageable on Expert, where your experience is such that you know exactly how to easily counter all of these obstacles. The second phase takes a brief moment of intelligence to figure out that the smoke bomb makes it impossible to get hit, but smoke bomb doesn't really do much for the rest of the fight, and thus, yeah, you do just have to learn that moving is better than waiting for the very last second in this phase, as you do need to kill the minions before rushing down and getting hit. It's in the final phase that the difficulty spikes across every level of experience, as the Anteater throws out infinite balls of bugs that have a good amount of health and a fast and random line of travel. This sucks for avoiding hits, but really sucks for trying to do damage, as you can't easily get this obstacle out of the way, while also dealing damage to a boss whose hitbox changes location every second. S ranking is difficult solely for that fact, and that you can't just get a constant stream of damage in, meaning time does become a worry. Number 10, Dr. Carl's Robot. Dr. Carl's Robot is the boogeyman of the original game. No boss embraces the idea of bullet hell more than this guy. It's like they put every style of gameplay into one boss fight. The first phase is a lot of micromanagement, with it being very overwhelming for a first-time player. The middle phase is mainly minion cleanup, and the final phase is the most spammed bullet hell attack in the game. This is terrifying for the first time you try to beat this guy, and the variety of ways you can do it arguably makes it harder, as you have to make choices quickly. Funnily enough, the laser is faster in normal mode than Expert, and overall, once you've got an understanding of everything, this boss becomes reasonably easy. Number 9, Captain Brinybeard. Listen, this boss seems simple, but the amount of times I go in thinking it's going to be easy and get met by the fury of Poseidon are too many to count. The irregularity in when and what attack he uses makes pre-planning positions very difficult to do. Usually you can just do that, but where the chest is, which sea beast, and when he's going to shoot at you all change between each run. Thus, his expert mode is actually quite challenging. There isn't much space on the screen, and with all these different projectiles, it's difficult for new and old players alike. I think it is still very doable, however, and that's why it isn't the hardest boss in the game. Plus, the final phase is a walk in the park. Finally, S ranking isn't that bad, as it's just beating it on time, as there are parries aplenty. Number 8, Calamaria. I think this is the only time which the order in which I'd actually fight these bosses has lined up with their difficulty, apart from the start. So why is Calamaria here? Well, it's once again the RNG. Expert mode is especially bad for this, as it combines attacks rather heavily during the first phase, with some taking some serious know-how to avoid. The timings on when she freezes you also feels quite random, and thus you can just get unfairly caught out by it. even with pre-positioning as much as possible. Once you've got through that, you've got to deal with precise movements, avoiding the cave walls, and planning where to be when you get frozen. It's a lot to think about, and I'd say it's actually difficult. Number 7, Ribby and Croak. What? An IO1 boss is one of the top 10 hardest bosses in this game? No way. That must be a mistake. No, there's no mistake here. These frogs are absolutely devious when it comes to getting an S rank. Sure, they're easy when you first play the game, but Expert Mode's first phase was such a pain to figure out and eventually try to S rank. Why though? Well, the flies are constantly being shot out at the same time as the main attack, and they need to be killed, as they can slowly clog up your screen space. Roundabout is great for this, but you do need to be jumping up and down pretty much constantly. You need to do this while also dodging the main attack, and getting parries on the fireballs, as this is your only chance. I remember having to create a whole new, really awkward movement pattern to accomplish this, and it took quite a while to figure out. On top of all this, you still need to do it all in time, which can be a worry, as if you just miss the cutoff for the final phase's invincibility, you might just tick over the timer and you've got to do it all again. It was such a refreshing challenge after most S ranks turned out to just be do the boss this time but don't get hit. This felt more like a whole new boss. Number 6, King Dice. This dude genuinely forced me to take a break from Cuphead as a kid. I made it through the entire game, got here and went, damn, I can't do this. For that, I have to put it at the maximum difficulty, as I couldn't do it, and had to come back and try again at a later point. The individual mini-bosses aren't that bad, it's just that all of it combined really hurts the morale when things go wrong, and in a first-time player panic, the parry skill check at the end can really catch you off guard. Once you've had some practice on all the mini-bosses, this guy does become doable, but even in my challenges, he sometimes gives me some trouble, especially since some of the expert mini-bosses do feel almost impossible to miss a hit on without the smoke bomb charm. But I can't lie, if you do well on expert, you might as well be given the S rank for just beating it, as you have extended time and extra hearts on certain mini-bosses. Initially, it's horrific, but the more you play, the easier it gets. Number 5, Glumstone the Giant. I love Glumstone, but from all my expert challenges on this channel, Glumstone always gets in the way. The second phase in particular is the biggest worry, as it is technically minion cleanup, but they move so fast that you've got to spam and pray that any that would be a risk to you are killed, while watching out for where they spawn and calculating the path of the ball. It is a lot all at once, and even then, you have to aim or jump up to damage the boss. The third phase is stressful and can genuinely be impossible to avoid a hit on at times, which is frustrating for the S rank, but overall it isn't that bad if you stay calm. The first phase is also a little bundle of chaos with how random everything is. There are gnomes popping up everywhere, the platforms go up and down and disappear, and the attack is random, so you never truly know what to prepare for. Did I also mention the ground is deadly? Number 4, the Devil. Despite what every gaming news outlet would say, the Devil is not the hardest boss in the game. He is hard, but no, 3 others take the cake. A lot of the difficulty in the Devil is the addition of everything put together in one fight. The first phase is very simple, but quick and difficult to avoid attacks. I mean, I still have so much difficulty avoiding this one staff attack. Plus, the little minions can get a lucky hit on you. During a first time run, this is all too quick, and takes some getting used to. You then get a breather until he spawns his minions. Some weapons make this phase practically impossible for you to get hit, but you've got to figure this out in the first place. Plus, these chips do get annoying. Similarly to King Dice, the final phase is a parry test, but with vertical projectiles, which are the hardest. So I don't even bother and just neo it. That was a lot, and yeah, I don't think I need to say much else, as it's supposed to be hard. It's the final boss. Number 3, Mortimer Freeze. This man is a straight up run killer. If everything's been going great, Expert Mortimer Freeze will ruin your day. The first phase is awkward as the minions are dropped in a random direction and they can't be killed instantly. You have to get them out of the ground, but even then they have a brief bit of invincibility. That's the only bit of difficulty in the first phase though, as Mortimer's high score comes from the second and third phases. When this dude turns into a straight up fridge, you are cooked. You can try to place the ice blocks in a convenient spot, but without a doubt, you'll find a reason why their location is inconvenient. His main attacks after this would be fine if the ice pops didn't come from out of nowhere at the speed of light to sit in the most perfect spot to be in the way. Then the third phase is a mad frenzy of rotating platforms and attacks whose placement could just be unlucky. I personally always have trouble avoiding the eye lasers, but all of them are difficult when you're panicking, which I get you need to just stay calm, but my history with this boss does not allow for that. Number 2, Grim Matchstick. I remember one summer afternoon sitting there and fighting Grim over and over again for 3 hours with endless determination against what felt like a wall. Well, eventually I did manage to beat him, but it took so much work and a true understanding of how he actually works. This is the first boss in the game to, in my opinion, require a weapon swap for a smooth experience. The final phase is so extremely difficult if you use a spam fire weapon like Roundabout or Pea Shooter, as it means the fireballs burst at random times whenever you accidentally deal damage to them. There is pretty much no way to react to this, as this can happen on spawn. With the small change to charge shot, the intentional fire makes sure you know exactly when and where a fireball might burst from. The platforms are reasonably difficult to deal with, especially on the first phase, and it takes some time to adjust to when you should jump in the second phase. This boss is all all about learning patience and very thought out movement. When S ranking, it is also quite frustrating as you can only get parries from the lasers on the first phase, so you've got to make sure you get good RNG and placement on them so that you can get them in time for the second phase, because you can't waste time to get an S rank. Plus, you've got to do all this and still make sure you don't get hit. And finally, number 1, Chef Saltbaker. The final boss of Cuphead certainly deserves the title of hardest boss in the game. They took everything they learned about how to make a boss difficult and melded it together here. The first phase is a mess of projectiles that Saltbaker cooks up a ton of combinations with, meaning you need to pay attention to what he's doing in the background in order to know what's coming next. These would already be tough without the random little firemen jumping down from the top of the screen occasionally. You can tactically move them around, but you've got to figure this out while also dodging all of these projectiles. Expert mode is much more difficult than regular as it just adds to this chaos. The second phase then brings back the claustrophobic feeling as your space is taken up by the little firemen and so many projectiles coming from all angles. Then the final phases don't have a ton of health, but you have to think fast on your positioning and make sure you always have a way out. I remember having no clue how to avoid the flower dancers, with my technique only being solidified once I practiced some more on expert. This whole fight is really difficult and you never get a rest within the phases, which of course means that S ranking is also tough, even if the parry opportunities are endless. It's so hard to avoid even a single hit. Thanks for watching to the end. Since you're here, you might as well subscribe. It only takes a second and every sub means so much to me. See you in the next video.